There comes a moment, quiet, unmarked, when something inside you whispers, I can't do this anymore. Not just the job, the relationship, or the routine. Something deeper. The performance, the pretending, the version of you that always knows what to say, the one who smiles when your chest is aching, the self that nods along while your soul is screaming for something real. At first, it looks like burnout. You feel numb around the people you used to please. Conversations drain you, dreams you once chased now seem artificial. You wake up in the morning, not with dread, but with nothing. Like a cord's been cut, and whatever used to animate your ambition has gone offline. You tell yourself to be grateful. You meditate, journal, exercise, but the emptiness doesn't lift. The rituals feel like echoes. You're not depressed, not exactly, but something is collapsing, and you're afraid to say it out loud. Because what if you really are falling apart? But what if you're not? What if the exhaustion isn't failure, but a sign? A signal that the persona you built, the one shaped by expectation, fear, survival, is no longer sustainable. What if you've simply reached the end of something that was never truly you? This video isn't a prescription or a spiritual shortcut. It's a reflection, a reverent inquiry into the strange moment when the identity we've worn for years begins to fall away. We'll explore how psychology, neuroscience, and ancient spiritual traditions all speak, often in different languages, to the same hidden truth. That awakening often begins in the rubble of who we thought we were. Because what feels like a breakdown may be something far more sacred. The old mask crumbling, the false self dissolving. And in its place, not a new identity to cling to, but a quiet, luminous presence waiting to be remembered. If these words stir something in you, some buried recognition, some silent yes, then you're not alone. You're part of a gathering wave of souls remembering what's real. Subscribe if you feel called, and stay close to this unfolding. We're not here to fix what's broken. We're here to see what was never broken to begin with. The journey begins at the edge of the mask. Are you ready to let it fall? Somewhere along the way, you learned how to be the version of yourself that kept things calm, or made people proud, or simply kept you safe. You didn't choose the script, but you memorized it well. Maybe it was the role of achiever, caretaker, rebel, charmer. Maybe it was silence or control. At first it worked. The mask gave you something to move with, a shape, a name, a way to move through rooms without too many questions. You became what the world rewarded, what your family recognized, what your early wounds demanded, and for a while, it helped you survive. But the cost was subtle and cumulative. Over time, you stopped feeling like a participant in your life. You became the one performing it, saying what was expected, doing what was necessary, thinking in loops that kept the world tidy, even if it meant shrinking parts of yourself you barely remembered having. Psychologically, this isn't weakness, it's adaptation. Gabor Mate speaks of how children, in their need for attachment, will trade authenticity for acceptance. It's not a decision, it's instinct. We become who we needed to be in order to be loved, or at least to not be abandoned. And that adaptation becomes so seamless, so practiced, it starts to feel like me. But it's not. It's a scaffolding, a structure built out of past conditions. And the moment real awareness starts to grow, that scaffolding begins to shake. At first, the signs are small. Tiredness that sleep won't fix. Irritation in places that used to feel fine. A strange grief when you're praised for something you no longer value. You feel like a guest inside your own reactions, your own voice. What's waking up isn't a new personality. It's the quiet realization that much of what you've called you was a set of agreements, cultural, familial, emotional, that no longer hold. And that's where fatigue becomes sacred. Because it means the old operating system can't run like it used to. Your nervous system, your thoughts, your behaviors, they're no longer synchronized with a version of self that once kept you alive but now keeps you small. You're not broken, you're just starting to feel something more honest. When the mask has been worn for years, taking it off doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like skin tearing, like losing direction. But that disorientation is a threshold. You're beginning to step beyond the survival version of you, not toward an ideal, not toward a better mask, but toward something bare, unfiltered, closer to essence. There's no need to rush, no need to explain. The unraveling is its own kind of intelligence. You're not letting go of identity because you've failed. You're letting go because somewhere inside you remembered you never needed to hold it so tightly, and what happens next, only presence can reveal. When the mask starts to slip, it doesn't fall away all at once. It unravels in fragments, moments of strange quiet, sharp anxiety, a dull ache behind your thoughts. You walk into familiar rooms and feel misplaced. Words you used to say easily now feel hollow. You laugh, but the sound doesn't land in your chest. Something has shifted, and you can't quite name it. This is the emotional fallout. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just deeply disorienting. There's a reason it feels like grief. The brain registers identity loss using the same neural pathways it does for physical pain. Studies show that the anterior cingulate cortex, active in heartbreak and rejection, also lights up when our sense of self begins to dissolve. The system doesn't distinguish between ego and limb. When something essential feels like it's being lost, everything inside reacts. You might notice yourself pulling away from people, not because you don't love them, but because you no longer know how to be the version of yourself they recognize. Even small talk feels like effort. You want silence, but not loneliness. You want truth, but can't yet say what that is. This is what some traditions call spiritual disorientation. It's not confusion in the head, it's a misalignment in the soul. You haven't found what's real yet, but you've grown allergic to what's false. And in between those two spaces, the world feels both too loud and too distant. Your job no longer feels like yours. Roles you once played begin to feel like costumes. You drift through tasks half present, unable to fake urgency. Inside, a question stirs, but it has no words yet, only a mood, a throb beneath the skin. This isn't regression, it's not a collapse of character. It's an encounter with raw selfhood before it reorganizes. When identity breaks down, it can look like burnout, depression, or numbness. But underneath, something is forming, a space that wasn't allowed to breathe before. The nervous system, once trained to perform and protect, is learning how to pause, how to feel without filtering, how to let go of coherence long enough for something deeper to emerge. None of this is comfortable. You might crave clarity, answers, a new label to replace the old one. But clarity doesn't arrive on command. It settles in slowly once the performance stops. This space you're in now, where nothing fits and everything feels fragile, isn't emptiness, it's possibility, stretching its limbs in a room you finally cleared. You haven't failed. You haven't lost the thread. You're in the middle. And the middle is where new language forms, where presence takes root, where a quieter kind of knowing begins to stir, beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the need to be anything at all. When identity dissolves, it often feels like falling without ground. The frameworks that once held you, beliefs, ambitions, definitions, begin to blur. It's not a clean process. There are days of clarity followed by weeks of fog. There are moments of strange peace laced with panic. The psyche doesn't surrender its illusions gently, it lets go in pulses. There's a quiet intelligence in that. In altered states, whether through grief, meditation, or psychedelics, the sense of a stable self can loosen. Not in a dramatic way, but like mist pulling back from the surface of a lake. Studies at Johns Hopkins show that during these states, the brain's default mode network quiets down. The internal narrator softens. What remains is presence, raw, unguarded, and strangely familiar. Many report that during these moments, the fear of death subsides, not because life becomes certain, but because the boundary between self and world starts to dissolve. The perception of separateness thins, and with it, the idea that we must constantly prove, protect, or perform ourselves into existence. This shift doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives through stillness, through sitting in the middle of the mess long enough to notice that something steady is watching from within. William James called these moments states of ineffable clarity, not born from reason, but from surrender. He studied how deep spiritual transformation often follows a descent into psychological darkness. The chaos wasn't the enemy, it was the condition through which a deeper order could appear. This isn't about becoming new, it's about seeing freshly. The unraveling exposes what was always there but hidden under layers of strategy, adaptation, fear. When the scaffolding falls, the view opens, and what you find isn't always grand or mystical. Sometimes it's the simplest awareness, the breath moving, the light on the floor, the pulse in your wrist. Ordinary things suddenly feel inhabited by something unspeakably alive. You begin to sense that your thoughts aren't the whole of you, that the voice in your head, the spinning doubts, the emotional flashbacks, these are weather systems. Temporary, shifting, and beyond them, something else watches quietly. This recognition doesn't need to be named, it doesn't need to be made into a goal. It only asks for presence, for willingness to remain in the quiet that follows collapse. In that quiet, the fear of being nobody starts to lose its weight, because presence doesn't need a name, it simply is. And from that place, choices begin to arise, not from habit or fear, but from something more whole. Not a version of self, a rhythm. And when you move in rhythm with that, life doesn't become easier, it becomes truer. There comes a moment in unraveling when the questions stop biting. The mind, tired of analyzing its own echoes, begins to quiet, not out of defeat, but from the slow arrival of something softer. Surrender isn't an act, it's a response, a loosening that happens when the effort to hold it all together grows heavier than the fear of letting go. Spiritual traditions have long spoken of this, though often in whispers, not declarations. In Zen, it's the falling away of the self who seeks. In Christian mysticism, it's the stillness that emerges after the soul has been emptied of everything it clung to. These aren't paths of conclusion, they are passages into presence. Trying to map what's happening with the mind becomes like trying to explain the wind with a diagram. The more precise the explanation, the more distance it creates. But in the body, in the chest, in the space behind the eyes, something begins to recognize what words can't touch. In these states, the nervous system softens. The body no longer tenses in anticipation of being judged, misunderstood, or rejected. Breathing slows, thoughts float more lightly. The need to be understood makes room for a deeper wish, to be at peace within oneself. There is nothing to rebuild here, no better version of you waiting on the other side of self-work. What's left is more spacious than identity, more silent than insight, and it doesn't ask for understanding, it only welcomes your presence. The mind may still want to name this moment, to decide if it's healing or regression, growth or bypass. That's its nature, to make sense, to categorize, to define. But another part of you is beginning to live outside of that rhythm, a place where not knowing isn't dangerous but alive. This is where post-traumatic growth takes root, not in resolution, but in how we live with the unresolved. Studies show that people who grow after rupture don't do so by solving their past, but by opening to new meaning. Not forced meaning, felt meaning. You might notice subtle changes, a gentler relationship with your thoughts, a slower way of speaking, more space between reaction and response. These are signs of integration, the inner system learning to move in harmony with something previously hidden. There's no timeline for this, no linear path. Surrender doesn't lead anywhere. It reveals, and in what it reveals, you may sense a kind of ancient stillness, one that was never lost, only covered. It won't shout, it won't convince, but it will wait. And when you're quiet enough, you'll notice it's been here the whole time. What begins as a collapse often ends in a kind of clarity too subtle to name. You look around at the pieces of the life you thought you were living and realize they no longer ask to be reassembled. Something else is moving now, not urgent, not loud, just steady, like breath through open windows. The self you thought you were, the one who strived, who managed, who carried the weight of perfection, is no longer holding the center. And in its place, something wider is breathing. It doesn't declare itself. It doesn't ask to be understood. It simply moves with you, quietly, like water learning the shape of its container. Awareness has taken root where identity once stood, and this awareness doesn't fix you, it sees you. There's a kind of peace that comes when you no longer need to explain your unraveling. When the ache becomes familiar and the silence begins to feel like home. You notice beauty where there used to be urgency. You rest without needing to earn it. You exist without performance. And somewhere in that stillness, a question begins to glow. If you are not who you thought you were, who is the one noticing that? The answer doesn't arrive in words. It arrives in presence, in the way the trees seem more vivid, in how your body feels softer in its own gravity, in the space between thoughts, where something ancient hums. You haven't become something new. You've remembered something timeless. There is nothing to reclaim, nothing to rebuild. Just this, a pulse of awareness that never needed fixing. A kind of aliveness that doesn't require a name. Stay close to that. Let it show you how quiet can be a teacher, how stillness can hold more truth than any belief. And if something here stirred recognition in you, then stay close to this channel too, not for answers, but for companionship on the long return inward. Thanks for watching.